What's going on, everyone? Today we have the meta snapshot for patch 14.13. There was like a small little patch earlier this week, but it did give some solid changes to the meta. S tier got cleaned up a bit. It's going to mainly be Lux Reroll and Yone Reroll. These two comps are the premier comps right now because there are small little changes to some of the other S tiers. However, we do have some good news. Kaa'Sa Bruiser is back in action right now. It went from like low to mid A tier all the way to the top, and it's looking like a pretty solid 4-cost comp right now. After that, we have Sage Lillia, Ethereal Blade Shen, Ghostly Zyra, Umbral Loon, Fast 9, Storyweaver Bard, Kobuko Lucky Paws, Story Champion Garen. This comp got a little bit of a nerf. Ashe Warden, Shen and Senna, level 8 Duelists, Midnight Siphon Yorick, Kayn Lee Sin, Kog'Maw, Duelists, Janna Zyra, Zoe Soraka, Arcanist Warden, Mythic Lillia, Built Different, Syndra Dryad, a Loon Invoker, Syndra Fated, Aphelios Reroll, and Dryad Reroll. So you'll notice Syndra dropped down quite a bit. They changed some of the Fated stuff, which was pretty big as we talked about in the patch review. Let's get into how to play each and every one of these comps. Starting off with the Lux Reroll comp, which is a 2-cost reroll comp. So 2-cost reroll, you want to be level 6 when you're doing the most of your rolls. So once you hit level 6, don't touch your level up button, put all your gold into rerolling your shop and getting a bunch of Luxes, hopefully getting Lux 3. I recommend going Spear of Shojin, Nashor's Tooth, and some form of ability power items on her, and then for Amumu, get some regular tank items. If you want to get a little more spicy with the items, head on over to teamfight.lol, stats, champions, and then you could type in porcelain and then we'll pull up Lux and Amumu. You could look up what items are great on them. On the right hand side, it shows the most built items and then the items that perform the best on them. But ideally, if you mix the two things, average placement and frequency, you generally get a pretty good balance of what items to build on them. But honestly, any of these things that you see here work pretty well. She's not the pickiest in terms of items, but there are definitely some that work better than others. Amumu, even less picky, because really you're just throwing random tank items on him because you're building a lot of items early so that you get a bit more value out of them. But if I had to choose, I'd probably go with Gargoyle Stoneplate. That is the most built one. Redemption's really good if he's 3-star. Any 3-star unit makes great use of Redemption. And then third item doesn't really matter too much. I kind of leave that as the flex spot. Also, Redemption is pretty cool on Amumu because he also has healing tiers. So you get the healing tiers for nearby allies, and you also get the Redemption heal, which is pretty nice. After that, you could throw random utility items on your Janna, such as a anti-heal, maybe even a static shiv if you need some magic resist penetration, or you could throw like an Ionic Spark on one of your tanks. Pretty simple comp, pretty easy to play, and also pretty deadly right now. Next comp up we have is Kayn and Yone. If you ever get Reaper Crest, it's going to be an amazing build. Drop that on your Silas, but the main focus is going to be Yone. Titans, BT going to be the two best options, and then Edge of Night plus some sort of healing item is great on Kayn. It could be a Bloodthirster, it could be a Hand of Justice. Maybe you have healing from some of your augments and then you don't even need that item anyways. And then you could complement this with a bunch of different things. If you are running Silas and itemizing him, it's not a bad idea to throw out a Galio. Galio is going to be a solid 4-cost tank, and he also gives Bruiser for your Silas. Other than that, Heavenly is a pretty good option. You could splash some Heavenly units. You definitely want Kha'Zix, and then Wukong's pretty good because he's a legendary. And then after that, you could add in or take out as many Heavenly as you want. Kindred in the backline, great for applying anti-heal, but not mandatory at all. This is primarily going to be a 3-cost reroll comp. You're going to be focused a lot on your Yone, but Kayn does a lot of work, and Silas also does a lot of work too. Next comp up we have are the A tiers. Trickshot Bruiser is back. This is going to be the Kaa'Sa build. You could go for the 4 Bruiser, 4 Trickshot. You could do the 4 Dragon Lord version. Both versions are fine. One's a budget version, the other one's a bit more expensive. So if you could afford a Lamborghini or whatever, like, go for the more expensive comp, but there's nothing wrong with like a Corolla, you know? Ironically, the car I drove when I had a car is worse than all of them. So you probably don't want to be driving my car. I won't even say what it is. It's not a best in slot car by any means. You're not going to find it on the S or A tier of the Bunny Muffins car tier list. But to play this comp, it's pretty easy. There's a whole how to play section down here. And the best place to find more info about this comp is to head on over to the website, bunnymuffins.lol, where we update the meta snapshot every single week. Just go to /meta or anywhere on the front page. It's very easy to get to. If you try it and it's hard to get to, leave a comment down below. I'll try to fix it, but I'm pretty sure it's very easy to get to. But next up, oh, I just realized I made a mistake. We have the Inkshadow Kia'Sa comp down here. We actually need to move this up a bit because if we look at the data for traits, we'll see at the top we have 7 Inkshadow at a 3.67. It's really good. But the only issue is that you need a Inkshadow emblem. So I would only play this if I get to 7 Inkshadow. If we just type in Inkshadow here, 5 Inkshadow, not enough. It's at a 4.47. You mainly want to focus around this 7 Inkshadow Power Spike. Let me actually move this up right now. I forgot to do this before. I'm going to refresh, go all the way back up to the top. I'm probably going to put this as the second comp in the A tier. So we have the Trickshot Bruisers, and then we go into the Inkshadow Kia'Sa right after that. But you really need the Inkshadow emblem. It's not that great if you don't get it, as you saw in the data before. But if you do get the Power Spike, like they did buff Inkshadows quite a bit. So it definitely is a very strong comp. And they buff Kia'Sa. So it's like 2 medium-sized buffs. Gonna be pretty decent, you know? But the tricky thing about this comp is getting Udyr. So what you want to do is save up a lot of gold, get to level 8, stabilize a little bit, then get to level 9. Ideally, you could get Udyr sometime in between that, and then you get your 7 Inkshadow Power Spike, throw the tattoos on whoever they're relevant on. Obviously, all the range damage dealing Inkshadow items are going to go on Kia'Sa. All the tank items are going to go on whoever is your main tank. In this case, that is generally going to be Ornn, and then you're going to use the Bruiser items on your Udyr. So protection, that one's going to go on Ornn. You could put it on Udyr if you have nothing else to put it on, if you have no other items to put on him, because you could always remove the tattoos. They're not like tattoos in real life. You could just bench the unit and then put the unit back on the board, and then you could put the tattoo on whoever you want. Tattoo of Force, this is amazing for Udyr, completely busted. Tattoo of Toxin, this one's going to be great on Kia'Sa. Bombardment, Kia'Sa, Vitality, Udyr. Attacks heal the holder for 3% of their max health and deal the same amount as bonus damage. He attacks a ton, so it's great on him. And then Tattoo of Fury, going to be great on your Kia'Sa. I just realized I'm so, like, it says on the right-hand side who uses it the most. So you could always use that as a guide instead. But what we have is Sage Lillia. Sage Lillia is going to be a powerhouse ability power comp. We went over a lot of physical damage comps last week, and this week, for 4-cost units at least, Sage Lillia is going to be the go-to. She's great because you combine it with Morgana, and the Sage buff gives them a lot of ability power in the backline. So if you ever get a lot of items, this is a comp to go for, because you can itemize so many different people. You have Nautilus, Lillia, Morgana, and other random legendaries that you can kind of splash in. Another good time to play this comp is if you have the econ to go fast 8 pretty safely, because you play a lot of 4-cost units, and 5 costs are more than welcome too, as this comp is decently flexible. You could swap out some of the other units. You could even drop Sages and just play legendaries eventually. But the Sage build right here is like a very good starter comp, and this comp is very good because it can be played in almost any situation as long as you have ability power items, because it's not reliant on any augment. Next one up we have is Ethereal Blade Shen. This comp got changed a little bit because they buffed 6 Behemoth. Apparently there was a bug with it, so they nerfed the comp to kind of compensate for the bug being fixed. But the overall power level, I mean, let's check it out. The best thing to do is with data, right? Data doesn't lie, but there are some assumptions to kind of put into it. Let's type it in. Ethereal Blade Shen, 4.43, 4.48. Worse than last week. I think it was at like a 4.1 last week. Let's take a look. It was like 4.08, 4.15. So the nerfs definitely hurt quite a bit, but overall still a solid augment, and it's quite easy to play. And I'm guaranteeing fewer people will probably go for this comp compared to before. So if you were ever contested with Ethereal Blade Shen, well, first of all, I would hope that situation never happened with you, but if you were, I'm assuming it's going to be happening a little bit less, but it still kind of does the same thing. What I like splashing in after getting 6 Behemoths in is a bunch of Ghostly units, because Ghostly works really well with single target damage, and Shen is pretty much all of that. But 2-cost reroll, very simple comp to play. Next one up we have is Ghostly Zyra. Another 2-cost comp we have here. Morgana in the back going to be supporting the whole cast, and of course we're going to focus mainly on Shen and Zyra. Shen, you just want generic tank items. Zyra, Nashor Shojin, and then third item. Zyra, Nashor Shojin, and then any third item. And then throw your leftovers on whoever you have left. It could be Riven, Aatrox if they're 3-star, Alawi if they're not, Zoe if they're not. And then later on, if you ever get something like a Spatula, you could go for like 6 Ghostly maybe. If you level up a ton, you could maybe add in another Sage, maybe like a Wukong to get some Legendary and a Sage in. But if you could reach something like this, you'll be doing pretty well in a bunch of different games. Next comp up we have is Umbral Reroll. Umbral Reroll is going to focus mainly on Elune. Elune's quite powerful, especially with Morello. That's got to be the best item on her. Let's check out the item stats again. We'll click here, type in Umbral, and then we see that 3-star Elune is averaging a 3.87 right now. Yone, he was in the S tier. He's averaging a 3.2. So best items, or most popular items, I should say, is Spear of Shojin, but I think the best one's got to be Morellonomicon, but you kind of need both in most cases. After that, just any AP item will do. Archangels is decent because she's often the last person alive, but if you have a hat, that's really good. Jeweled Gauntlet is okay. Nashor's Tooth, not really that necessary. And then Adaptive Helm. I actually like Adaptive Helm a lot if I'm not able to get the Spear of Shojin. It's nice because I have a cloak on my bench, And sometimes you don't need all the cloaks. If we look at this item build over here, like I really only see some random tank items on Ornn, which honestly could be any tank item, and then BT on Set, Adaptive on Sylas. You could easily just throw one of those Negatrons to a Loon if you're not able to get a sword. Sometimes, depending on the patch, specific items are hard to get, such as like bow, sword, rod, tier, depending on what's in the meta. And that's what's great about an item like Adaptive. It uses a defensive item component into a potentially offensive item. But 6 Umbral is going to be the key point to reach here. It's really easy to do if you ever get an Umbral emblem. That one's going to help you out a lot because then you aren't reliant on hitting set to get 6 Umbral in. But if you don't, the comp is still playable as long as you have a ton of Aloons. Secondary carry, I would say it's got to go to either Sylas or Set. Obviously, if you have a Set 2 in the late game, he's going to be smacking people all over the place. Put a bunch of attack damage items on him and call it a day. But most games, it's going to be relying on Sylas. Sylas is going to be good because he jumps to the backline a bunch. He jumps all over the place, actually. And with an Ionic Spark, he's able to apply the magic debuff to a lot of different units, which is great because Aloon, you can't really predict where she's going to shoot stuff because it's always based on your opponent's positioning. She targets the row with the most units, but depending on how your opponent's position, sometimes it could be the front row, sometimes it could be the back row. But again, that's why Sylas is a great holder of this item because he kind of jumps around everywhere. Next one up we have is going to be Fast 9 5 cost. If you have a ton of gold, this is a comp to go for. A bunch of different items that you kind of have to flex between because you always want to play around whichever 2-star legendary that you hit. The most consistent is probably going to be Aurelia followed by Wukong. Both of those I've seen solo carry a lot of different games. But you want to complement this with 4 Dragonlord just because you get like a nice little global buff with it, and it also stuns the enemies after I think it's like 10 seconds. Next comp up we have is going to be Storyweaver Bard. This comp jumped up a little bit in popularity, not too much, nothing too crazy, but Tahm Kench and Bard are both pretty solid. One way you could think about this comp is that it's pretty much the same as the Shen build, except it's 3 cost units instead of 2 cost units, and you don't have to rely on getting the hero augment. Bard essentially kind of does the same thing as Shen. He just attacks really quickly at a target. It does bounce around a little bit, but you just have the 2 Rage Blades on him, and then you throw generic tank items for your front line. Nothing too complicated about this comp. Really easy to play if you are kind of new to the game, or maybe not as well versed in some of the more complex stuff of TFT. But the only important thing about this comp is having perfect items for Bard. It's pretty much a non-negotiable. Next one up we have is Lucky Paws Kobuko. This one's going to revolve around the Lucky Paws augment. I actually want to take a look at all the hero augments and see how they are performing because they changed a couple of them. So the most popular one is, well, we have Lucky Claws right here, or Lucky Paws. It's averaging a 4.41. Ethereal Blades we looked at before, around 4.43, 4.48. So Midnight Siphon Plus, which is the one you get in Stage 3, is going to be averaging a 4.07. And then the regular Midnight Siphon, 4.55. And then the last popular one is Storied Champion, that's 4.47. And then the last one we could look at is Drop Blossom. No one really picks this, but it's actually doing decently in the data. Maybe we have to add this comp eventually. But good job on Riot. All the champion augments are actually balanced now. Holy cow, I did not think that would be possible because normally whenever I see the champion augments, they are either really good or really bad. But one thing is for sure, they are all easy to play. So for this comp, you want to have 6 Bruisers and then just throw in some random carry in the back. The best ones are going to be some sort of anti-heal applier. So Hui, great because Morello on Hui makes it so he burns everyone on the field. Same thing for Aurelia. You could put like a red buff on Aurelia or a Morello as well. And then put some stacking item on them like Rageblade, Aurelia, Archangel's Hui, because your 6 Bruisers in the front line are going to live a very, very, very long time. Full tank items on Kobuko and Galio, utility or damage tank items on Sylas, and you're going to be good to go. Next comp up we have is going to be Storied Champion Garen. This one's going to be a 6 Warden build. Same thing as before with the Kobuko, 6 Warden, and then some backline carry. Aurelia is going to be decent, but Garen does like a bunch of damage, so he relies more on damage items rather than pure tank. And ideally, he just goes infinite because he just heals up after he kind of hits people. But he does fall off a bit later in the game, but in the beginning, he can be very, very scary, especially once you get him to 3-star, which is super easy to do because you get 3 free copies when you take the augment. And then ideally, you only take it if you have a bunch of Garens to begin with. Next one up we have is Ashe Warden, 4 Warden, 4 Sniper. Great beginner build. Also pretty affordable. If the 4 Bruiser, 4 Trickshot Kia'Sa is a Corolla, this would be an Accord, because it pretty much is the same thing. It's just 4 frontliners, 4 backliners, and then they share some random traits magically. and then you itemize your main tank, itemize your backline carry, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So I guess one difference is that the Trickshot Bruiser comp, they like playing around Teemo a bunch. There are actually a couple of decent Teemo builds right now. But if you want a secondary carry in your Ashe build, sometimes people use Syndra. If they get to level 9, they throw in like a Fated. But you could also use some sort of Morello applier or red buff applier in Aphelios or Senna. The next build up we have is going to be the Shen and Senna comp. This one's going to be a 2-cost reroll, lots of Shens, lots of Sennas. That's the only time you would go for this. Apart from that, all you really need is decent items on Shen. Stoneplate's going to be my favorite, and then some sort of armor pen on Senna. And then just any AD items will do there. Pretty easy comp. It's just 2-cost reroll, just stay level 6, roll down until you hit 3-star of everything, and then level up, throw in more ghostly units. That's really all there is to it. Next one up we have is level 8 and 9 Duelist. This one is going to be revolved around Lee Sin mainly, but his secondary crew is going to be Volibear and Tristana, and then Aurelia going to be the big gun in the late game. What does Aurelia even throw? Is it like swords or knives? I don't even know. It's some sort of blade, right? But the key to this build isn't necessarily like the items or the augments or anything. It's really just getting to level 8 and potentially even level 9 quickly and hopefully pretty safely, because the main power of the comp is getting both Duelists and Aurelia online, because it's such a disgusting combo. With 6 Duelists, Aurelia just does so much damage for some reason, and then the rest of the units kind of are just there. I mean, they still do some things, but like, if you just look at the damage charts after some Duelist fights, you'll see some pretty surprising numbers. Next comp up we have is going to be the Midnight Siphon Yorick. We checked out the hero augment stuff before, but you really just want 6 Behemoth. Similar to all the other hero augment comps, you just go for like the 6 tank trait and then add in some DPS in the backline. You could use Invokers because Elune is an Umbral unit, so it kind of helps out Yorick a bit. But the most important thing for items on Yorick is just getting generic tank items on him. Some people like putting like BT on him. I find that the best combo is just going to be full tank on Yorick, because he gets so much health that getting all the resistances you can really just makes him that much tankier. And ideally, he kind of kills everything before the lifesteal even matters that much. But again, all the hero augments are really easy to play, and they're actually balanced now. Sin Kayn gonna be the next comp up. This one's gonna be a 4-cost melee comp. So a lot of people, when they play TFT in the early game, they really like slamming stuff like BT and Titans. And if you have those items slammed, you're either gonna go Yone or you could go something like this. So if you're going for the Yone comp and you don't manage to hit it, or if you see a lot of other people going for Yone, switching over to Sin Kayn is going to be a great idea, because you use the same items and you're going for a different cost. So ideally, you're able to hit this comp a little bit easier. It definitely is a backup plan, and you could also use Morgana to kind of complement your team, but overall it's going to be a solid option to kind of pivot into. Next one up we have is going to be Kog'Maw Reroll. I've said this before, but it's going to be one of the few 1-cost rerolls in the game, but it's really just reliant on getting 2 specific items on Kog'Maw, Blue Buff, and Nashers, and then getting an Ionic Spark on Cho'Gath. Like, the average placement change on Cho'Gath and Kog'Maw when you get these specific items is like astronomical, so I would not even attempt to go for this build without being able to get those 3 items. After that, just play all the units on the left side: Cho'Gath, Malphite, Neeko, Caitlyn, and Kog'Maw. Then add whatever units you hit later on. You could expand on any of the traits you see on the left-hand side. Next one up we have is going to be Duelists Reroll. If you get a lot of Volibears and Tristanas, it's worth going for, because it's a pretty strong comp once you hit it. It's just kind of very expensive to do, and it's hard to get Aurelia when you slow roll for Tristana and Volibear at level 7. Aurelia becomes very elusive for some reason. So there is a risk when you go for this, so I would only do it if you get some Econ Augment, or if you get like a Champion Duplicator, like the lesser ones. That way you could hit Volibear and Tristana 3 quite easily, and then level up, play Aurelia, and then have like 2 monsters in the back and then 1 monster in the front. But it's a decent build and also easy to play, and it's a good attack damage item comp. So if you're going for the Kia'Sa build and you don't hit it, you could go into the Duelist comp if you have a lot of Tristanas. Like, let's say you use Tristana as an item holder for Kia'Sa in the mid game because you're just playing attack damage units, and then you get more Tristanas. It's something to just kind of go all into. Next one up we have is going to be Janna Zyra Reroll and the Zoe Soraka build. You really only play this with a 2 healthy augment. It's very good with that, and then to pick your carry, you just see which units you get more of. If you have a lot of Jannas, go for Janna and do the Shojin Rageblade Archangels build. If you get the Zoe, go for a Shojin Nashers and some ability power build. I talked about this a little bit last week. There are some builds where people play Zoe on the front line with a Bloodthirster. It's a bit risky to do. I don't recommend doing that if it's like your first game with it. I think the backline version is a bit safer. Next one up we have is going to be Arcanist Warden. Arcanists in general are a good backup comp to kind of play if you get a lot of ability power. So essentially what it is, it's going to be a Syndra comp or a Zoe comp in the mid game. Sometimes you could use it to go Zoe reroll like we saw up here, but other times you just go for Syndra and just play like a ton of Arcanists. It's great when you get +1 emblems because it uses it so easily, and it's pretty easy to get to 8 Arcanists because you don't need to rely on hitting anything too crazy. However, because it's easy to get, the power unfortunately is not as high up as some of the other comps, but luckily you could complement it with some strong Wardens instead of all the Arcanists, and you can mix and match a lot of different builds. There are also a lot of other comps that use the Warden frontline with some sort of AP backlines, like there's some Teemo comps out there. The Lux comp we saw earlier is pretty similar to this too. So you could kind of start this as a base going Arcanists and Wardens, and then kind of switch into a different comp later on depending on what you're hitting that game. Like obviously if you get a lot of Luxes, go Lux. If you hit an early Syndra, you can consider using her and pivoting all your items into her, or you could use what you see here and go fast 9 and add in a bunch of random legendaries. Next comp up we have is Lillia Mythic. If you're going for the Sage Lillia build but you get a bunch of Mythic emblems, I recommend going for like the 7 Mythic build, because it's a really powerful buff, and you could even mix the Sages back in. But alternatively, you could also go for some sort of Invoker build. So like 4 Invoker with Annie, Lillia, Azir, plus the Kog'Maw. Very, very powerful stuff because Kog'Maw is both a Mythic and an Invoker. So if you are playing around emblems, pretty much all the 3, 5, 7, 10 traits are only good with the emblems. You go to like the 7 trait, but just playing the 7 trait on its own, not going to be that powerful because you have to play a bunch of the crappy 1-cost units. But if you have the emblem, you could kind of skip it. Obviously in the Mythic build, you still keep Kog'Maw because it's both an Invoker and a Mythic. So it gives too much stuff. You still have to play it no matter what. But for example, you don't have any 2 costs here, you know? But sometimes when you go to 7 Mythic, sometimes you add in Nico because you only have 1 emblem, but there are other units to add too. Overall though, pretty solid 4-cost comp. You gotta be level 8 for this. And then you have good late game insurance with Azir and Hui. Next one up we have is Built Different. Built Different actually got buffed a little bit. So if we look at the stats here, we go to Augments and then go to Built Different. It went up to a 4.26. So it definitely did get a lot better. Is it like the best thing ever? Probably not. If we look at the augments here, it definitely is in the upper half. I would take this augment pretty often, but it's not like the most broken thing in the world, like how it normally is in some other patches. Like recently, it was actually odd. It was like at a 4.5 or something like that. So it was actually pretty balanced. But I remember in previous sets, it was either like the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world. And there really wasn't anything in between before, but now it's actually like pretty solid. Next one up we have is Syndra Dryad. The Syndra comp did drop quite a bit. It's not, again, like the worst thing in the world, but Syndra did lose a lot of power because they nerfed a bunch of the Fated buffs. They nerfed Syndra's damage amp. They nerfed Ahri's ability power. They might have nerfed something else, I forget. I'd have to rewatch my own patch notes video. youtube.com/bunnymuffins. But the good news is with nerf comps is that even though they are weaker, fewer people go for them. So if you do get a decent start with this, maybe you get some early Syndras, it's worth kind of going into anyways, because you know for sure that you're not being contested. So ideally, even though it's a bit weaker, you hit the comp easier, and then you hopefully use that to level up faster, get to level 9, go to get some 2-star legendaries a little quicker than you normally would before, and then you're still decently happy. Just because something's towards the bottom of the A tier doesn't mean it's like bad or anything. It's still playable, it's just a bit more situational, just like this Elune build. There's the Umbral Elune build that people prefer, but if you get a bunch of Invokers, like yeah, why wouldn't you play this, you know? Next one up we have is going to be Syndra Fated. Same thing as the other Syndra comp, but this one goes 7 Fated, but you definitely only want to go for this if you get Fated emblems. At least 1, ideally even 2. That way you could drop some of the useless units. And the Fated emblem is incredible on a bunch of other units too. Essentially playing 7 Fated with the Fated emblem just makes one unit very, very strong, because they get the Fated buff from whoever you link up together. In this picture we have Set and Syndra linked up. Pretty solid for most things because Set gives the lifesteal, Syndra gives the damage amp. So it pretty much works on everyone, but obviously you could tailor it to your team. Like if you have a full AP team, you could do like Ahri. If you have like a full AD team, obviously do Aphelios, but that would be a little odd to see because you're mainly relying on Syndra for a bunch of damage. But maybe if you're going for Set main carry and if you have no AP items, you could just like link up Set and Aphelios, you know? The world is your oyster, you're free to try whatever you want. Next one up we have is Aphelios Reroll. Again, with the other Fated comps, I like having the +1 emblem. But this is mainly just a 3-cost reroll at level 7 focused on Thresh and Aphelios. Tank items on Thresh, AD items on Aphelios, and then Ashe secondary carry. And after that, we have Dryad Reroll. This comp actually got buffed a little bit. Not anything too crazy. We could check the data to confirm. We could go to stats, champions, and then type in Dryad over here. And we could look at the 3-star average placement for Gnar, 4.37. Nothing too crazy. Kindred's is pretty high though. I'm guessing that's more so for the Reaper stuff, not so much the Dryad stuff. But it definitely is a viable comp. It's just not something that you should go for every single game. So hopefully you all learned a bit more about the meta in patch 14.13 after watching this video. We're going to be focused again mainly on the 2 S tier comps, the 2 reroll comps, and then if you are going for cost, probably Kia'Sa or Lillia going to be the main go-tos. After that, if you get insane starts for any of these, go for those instead. But that's going to be it for me today. We'll be updating this next week as well. So I hope to see you all there. If you have not subscribed to the channel already, I recommend doing so down below, and I will see you all next time.